You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. A recent analysis by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution mapped Georgia's 7 million registered voters, compared how distance to their local precincts increased or decreased from 2012 to 2018. During that time, county election officials shut down 8% of Georgia's polling places and relocated nearly 40% of the state's precincts. The analysis showed that the further voters live from their precincts, the less likely they are to cast a ballot. Joining me right now is Cliff Albright, co-founder of Black Voters Matter. Cliff, this is the kind of voter suppression we have been talking about for years. Republicans sit here and they say, oh no, we aren't doing these things. We talk about voter ID, we talk about gerrymandering, but shutting down precincts and moving them further away, it is all about keeping people from being able to vote.
You're exactly right, and that's why, and thank you for having me on, Roland. That's exactly why we're seeing that all of this has really increased ever since 2012, ever since the 2013 Shelby decision, of course, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. It just so happens that when you look at these poll shutdowns, and it's not just Georgia, it's all across the country, but particularly bad in Georgia under the previous Secretary of State, Kemp. And so what you see is that ever since the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, you saw that those shutdowns, that amounts to 214 polling places right here in Georgia. And it's not equally distributed. And so in some of these counties, even some rural counties, like there was an article in the article that you mentioned, there was one county that was talked about. It was a rural county that only had 5 polling places. 4 of them were shut down. In Randolph County, where we went with our Black Voters Matters bus, the blackest bus in America a couple of years ago, they tried to shut down 7 out of 9 polling places. So the way that this distribution is taking place and the populations that it's impacted is clearly a voter suppression tactic. And that's before we even get into the other piece of that, which isn't just the shutting down of the polling places, but it's also the relocation of other polling places. That also has a disastrous impact.
Well, and in fact, if folks actually go to, I'm pulling it up right now, democracydiverted.com. This is a report done by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And there was a number of groups who put this whole thing together. And what they showed is that across the South, a total of 1,200 polling locations were actually shut down. Henry, if you go to my iPad right now, folks, this is the map right here, and you see. Okay, so you can't. I don't know why you can't see it, folks. Check that HDMI connection, please. I want to show this because again, this is what people need to understand. We're not just talking about just Georgia. 1,200 across the South, and so. A 50% decrease you see in the dark areas. You should be able to see it right now. 25 to 50% decrease, 10 to 25% decrease, 1 to 10% decrease. What you're not seeing on this map, increases. The fact of the matter is, you're right. After the Shelby v. Holder decision, Republican legislatures across the South and across the country raced to shut down precincts because they did not have to have pre-clearance on any of their changes to voting procedures.
That's right. And when you think about the combination, right, because what we know is that they have an entire playbook, an entire voter suppression playbook. And so it's not just this issue of closing polls and relocating polls, right? We know that it's combined with the purges. But think about the way that these things combine, right, and reinforce one another. So you have the closing of the polling places. You've had documented what the impact of that is on turnout. So you've got an increasing number of people who can't vote, who don't vote because of the closing. Then what do? If they don't vote because of these distances over a certain number of cycles, now you come in with the purges. Now you come in with use it or lose it. So in essence, what you're seeing is you're seeing one voter suppression tactic designed to decrease turnout, and then you come in and you re-penalize the very folks that you had already disenfranchised by closing the polling places. You double disenfranchise them by now saying, because you were so vulnerable to us closing these polling places and because your turnout went down, Now we're going to take you off the polling list. Then you see what? You see absentee voting becomes more important because for an older person that used to walk to their polling place and now it's 5 miles away or 10 miles away, so now absentee voting becomes more important. But at the same time, what we've seen is, and especially here in Georgia, that the Secretary of State was ruthless in coming down on organizations for registering black voters, for using absentee ballots to get black voters to get their polls counted when they can't get to the polls. So you see that whole voter prosecution issue also being overlapped with the closing of the polling places. And then you see what? You see attacks on people giving rides to the polls. Right here in Georgia, we had a partner that was giving rides to the polls and through a unique partnership with some funeral homes that were providing vehicles. And that person was pulled over and had 8 patrol cars come over and stop him because he was parked on the wrong side of the road. They knew that he was in a vehicle that was being used for rides to the polls. The rides to the polls that were increasingly necessary. Why? Because of closing the polling places. So it's a layered strategy that we're seeing.
Absolutely. Cliff Albright, we surely appreciate it. Thanks a lot, co-founder of Black Voters Matter.
Thank you, Roland.
Dr. Greg Carr, Chair, Department of Afro-American Studies, Howard University. Erica Savage-Wilson, host, Savage Politics Podcast. Eugene Craig, CEO, Eugene Craig Organization. Eugene, I want to start with you. The reality is, after the Shelby v. Holder decision, Republicans could not wait to suppress the vote. They quickly moved to pass voter ID laws, shutting down of these various polling locations, moving them further away. In fact, not just hurting African Americans and Latinos. In Wisconsin, I remember in 2012, a clerk stated that she purposely moved an early voting location off of a college campus because she said too many of those young folks were voting Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, it's the effort to hurt Democrat votes. Republicans know that. Look, they turned it to a regional minority party. 10 years from now, Republican Party is going to be a regional minority party unless they get their act together. And so what you're seeing is a full-on assault, funded by dark money and, bad money, if I could characterize it that way, to fund these efforts. And that's what you're seeing here. They know that they can't win these constituencies, so the next best thing is to just make sure they don't vote or aren't able to vote or, have a speed bump or 5 to vote.
Greg, bottom line is that's what we're seeing here. Republicans know if it's a huge turnout, they lose. They do not want to see black people turn out in elections like they did in 2008 and 2012.
That's exactly right. And then to keep it Georgia specific in a moment, Roland, parenthetically, I want that top, brother. But anyway, shout out to the great thief, the illegitimate governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, who stole the his most recent the gubernatorial election. But they've got a particular eye on November 2020. Why? Because Johnny Axelson resigned from his seat, and Kelly Loeffler is up for election to fill the last 2 years of that seat, and David Perdue's seat is also vacant. He's running for re-election. They will both be defeated in November if we power through this moment. Brian Kemp is pulling out all the stops. They're pulling out all the stops because they realize that they're about to lose 2 seats in Georgia if black people just do like we've been saying, and you led out with this, every year re-register and go in there and wipe them off the face of that state, because Mike Epstein can win in Mississippi. They can flip 2 seats in Georgia. The demographics are in our favor, and as we just heard our brother say, you're absolutely right. They are now dropping all pretenses, and they don't need hoods and sheets anymore. They are in the broad daylight trying to steal everything going.
Absolutely.
Erica.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, that North Carolina, there was just a decision that was issued in North Carolina, December 31st. They were still fighting to ensure that people would have to show up to the primary with ID. And so the statement on the Secretary of State plainly says that, listen, this decision is firm until further notice. So when we see these efforts, going back to another illegitimate person in a governorship, Ron DeSantis, that voting is not a privilege. Voting is a right. But what both of you brothers, I absolutely agree with, that the onus is on the people to show up and to over-index and to put that into plain language, meaning you need to show up, your mama, your cousin, the trap boys, everybody has to show up.
Come on, Eric.
Everybody has to make sure one another is registered, and everybody has to go to the poll. The same way that we would wait for other things, you stand in that line and you make sure that you vote.
And what's more important is that there are a lot of states that have their state legislature elections this cycle. And so folk turnout, those same state legislatures are going to be the ones that are going to determine what the lines and maps look like during redistricting over the next year and a half.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, join Reverend Dr. Jackie Hood Martin as she engages others to think like a leader. Are you looking to enhance your leadership or that of your team in 2020? Well, you can join her online course and mastermind group, How Successful People Think. She'll be your guide as you learn timeless leadership principles to apply to daily living. The offer expires on February 28th. To register or start the online course, go to www.livetolead.com/Leesburg. Livetolead.com/Leesburg. Again, it is it's an online leadership course that you want, and it's called How Successful People Think. And so the deadline is February 28th. And so livetolead.com/Leesburg. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.